Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am so glad you're here today, joining me for the Wildly Loved series. This is really a series targeting how our childhood wounds and traumas and relationships and childhood and attachment patterns, how all of that can show up in our adult lives and relationships with ourselves and others. And so please check out the first few videos I posted last week if you're wanting to kind of get on board of the series and learn more. Also, if you're new, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell, that little box, and then you'll get notified of when I post new videos. And just a quick FYI, if you are new here, please know that I post pretty much every day, multiple times a day on TikTok, all around these mental health topics, and that down below I have a link to some courses I spent almost a year creating, really about helping us heal our hearts and lives and minds as a result of our childhood and relational wounds. Today's video is a really important one for so many reasons, because the idea of who attracts narcissists, while I know this is such a common topic these days, I feel very, very strongly that narcissists choose us. Us meaning many of us raised with many of the qualities that helped us survive childhood, and not necessarily ways that are healthy for us today, but ways we had to acclimate. I do not believe that the average healthy person, I guess that's not really the right word, the average person who may have been raised perhaps by more secure parents, while they may be just as easily targeted, I think they're more inclined to recognize these patterns at least sooner than those of us who have certain childhood experiences that we actually are more attracted to narcissists for in the first place. So I think that if they get into those relationships, generally speaking, they tend to get out of them faster or recognize them, or frankly not even fall prey to them. And you really do fall prey to narcissists in terms of what happens. Of course, the research pretty much focuses on the idea that many narcissists had their own wounded childhoods and their own parts of their stories. And we're still understanding the role of genetics and things like borderline and narcissism and other disorders. But we're going to focus today on helping save us, those of us who have certain wounds. And so let's talk about what kind of, I believe, sets us up to end up choosing narcissists really unconsciously in an attempt to heal or to match some quality inside. But as I said, often qualities that were cultivated in childhood. The first one is caretakers, and I think that when you think about the classic anxious and disorganized type of attachment patterns, you are going to see a dynamic very common in their children, which is to become a caretaker, which is really based in the idea that part of what we had to do in childhood was learn to rotate around the parents' or primary caregivers' needs, to read their nonverbal signals, to try to get in front of whatever their wants, needs, or desires were, whether it was their anger, their emotional neediness, and being a best friend, whatever it was, we learned to do that. And we become very common in the more anxious style outside-in orientators. We are very good at trying to focus on and read first what other people need. And who is going to take most advantage of that? Somebody who is more motivated to get their needs met first. Now, of course, narcissists are very masterful at not presenting that way in the beginning, and I'll get to that also in a minute, how that pairs with childhood. But I think you will find that people who are really good at taking care of others, often to their own detriment, are often at risk for choosing narcissists. Number two, spiritual people. People who are very much grounded in forgiveness, in rescuing, in sort of trying to see the best in people, especially if they fall prey to more communal narcissists or narcissists who seem to be about caring for others, but really are caring for themselves. People who try to sort of resonate with a higher power or a way of understanding other people and trying to meet their needs. I've seen that a lot. People who want to heal others. Oftentimes, it's quite common to see, frankly, a lot of therapists and other, psychologists and healers, healing type professions or helping professions, I should say, who have been in relationship or were raised by more narcissistic partners and parents. And unfortunately, the narcissist's low self-esteem, which is the root of a lot of this, wounds for them, is disguised by what appears to be confidence and a containing and a wholeness. And so that can be really compelling for people who are more spiritual in nature. Number 3 is conflict avoiders, or those who have issues around, not liking conflict, and who tend to want to acquiesce to other people's needs, who always want to be appropriate, right? They want to deal with things in a more cerebral or more mature dynamic. And so they keep going in again and again if they do ask for needs or try to confront, and oftentimes they don't in general because they don't like conflict, often going back to their own childhoods and that conflict wasn't safe, but they keep doing that. And so they avoid holding the narcissist accountable. They avoid having conversations and confrontations. And when and if they do, so many narcissists are so masterful at even pretending to be empathic and saying, yes, I hear you and I get you, and that's valid, if they're able to do that, if they're not super defended, but then never really changing. But it's very confusing if you're a conflict avoider and you feel like even when you have tried to lean into it, you thought you self-advocated, you thought you were trying to have an adult conversation, and they just, sort of pull the wool over your eyes and act like they do. Or they are very good at, often anger and rage and conflict, which is scary. And so you don't even try to go there. Maybe you try to go around it. But at the end of the day, that power imbalance with their anger and their tendency to make conflict scary often reinforces your own childhood and makes it much less likely for you to really advocate and get your needs met, and to then potentially leave the relationship if needed, because often, once again, that ties back to childhood wounds. The 4th one I would say is overly empathic and savers. And all of these kind of go together. You can see the picture I'm painting. But oftentimes we know that people who are overly empathic and had to develop empathic qualities as children to kind of take whatever someone else gave to them. And oftentimes they're put in roles as, being parentified, being little parents, being best friends, always understanding. Because the truth is, if a parent is hurting you again and again and again, and you have nowhere to go, there's some party that has to try to make it about you. It's your fault, right? It's something wrong with you. That's that egocentricity of children. But even once you get past that, it's often people who have learned to, once again, going back to attachment, rotate around others and to try to find the good qualities in the parent, to try to be compassionate, to try to, dad is working really hard and he sacrifices a lot and he has to travel and he works hard for this family. And yes, that may be true, but that doesn't justify his selfishness, his focus on himself and neglect of his children's emotional needs. But that's really hard to hold as a child. And so being very empathic and a saver, wanting to kind of going back to the other two also, that rescuing and make it okay for people can be a very great trait for a narcissist, because once again, they're going to take and love that you're giving them grace and empathy and allowing them to get away with all the things they get away with. And all of these can really feed back into that deep core sense of yourself, not really feeling like you're worthy of better or more. And that really leads into the next one, the last one, which is often, I believe, children raised by untreated borderline parents, narcissistic parents, and people who have complex PTSD. Because at the core, what we are seeking, if these were our parents often, is we are seeking emotional safety and security and stability. And that is the heart of what we didn't get. And this is even true for those people who want to say my parents were emotionally immature, right? Which I think really actually, when you break the criteria down, looks a lot more like narcissistic and borderline parents. But the heart of it is emotional instability, lack of availability, and really a lack of emotional safety. And so why are people who are struggling with core wounds like fears of abandonment and, not being enough and worthiness and a deep sense of toxic shame, which is very common in children raised by borderline parents or narcissistic parents or those with kind of complex trauma, is that because of all of the chaos, right, the emotional dysregulation, especially common in borderline and often in complex trauma, those can look very similar in parents. And of course, if a parent is narcissistic and that feels like home. But going back to that instability, what we're seeking is somebody who is not so emotionally unstable. And especially in the beginning, narcissists can appear very, whole and secure and stable and confident. And oftentimes they're very successful and intelligent. And so that can be very alluring. From the outside in the beginning, that appears as safe. And that is why you will often see people who struggle with borderline choosing even narcissistic partners themselves, because it feels like the opposite of emotional chaos in the beginning. Now, it can play out pretty quickly that the narcissist has anger, and that doesn't seem so stable. But because of that internalized low sense of self as a result of parents who struggle with BPD or NPD or complex PTSD, we think it's our fault. We don't think we're worthy of it. And so we keep trying to shift and change and make it good enough for the narcissist. And so from my perspective, all of these are grounded in the attachment wounds that might set us up in the first place if we end up unconsciously choosing a narcissistic partner because of those, especially if they're unhealed wounds. And I would say this is the big difference too between people who are more generally secure, had more secure parents, and those who didn't have it, is that at the core is often a shame for our neediness, a fear of not being loved. And so we're more likely to not only attract those partners, but oftentimes it's harder for us to get out if we remain unhealed or untreated or unsupported in our own wounds. As I said with each video, I want to offer some kind of little just, thought or journal or exercise. And I really do think that for this particular video, to go through each of the things I talked about and to list whichever topics that you related to most, the being overly empathic or avoiding conflict, and trying to connect the dots between where you experience those things in childhood that set you up to be like that. To try to pinpoint, yes, I do have an anxious style because my parent was that way, and I've learned to really first focus on other people. And so to try to begin to put the dots together and connect, where do I need to start working on my healing? Where am I most vulnerable to doing these things, right? If I feel like I'm not worthy inside, doing work on worthiness. If I tend to neglect my own needs as a caretaker, to begin to back off a little bit, just a little bit on my caretaking and try to shine the light more on myself. If I struggle with being, confrontational and self-advocacy, or dealing with anger and conflict, to maybe working on that in therapy, like triaging that as something important to begin, because that's a huge roadblock to my own, feelings of self-worth. So trying to make a list of where you relate and connect the dots, and maybe try to prioritize the next goal you want to work on through, reading or podcasts or therapy or whatever. I think those are really important. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you will join me for tomorrow's video, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye, guys.